Some weapons don't make noise. The most precise ones never do. A man who walks into his own home on Christmas Eve, sits at the head of his own table, watches his wife introduce another man to his family, and says absolutely nothing, that man is not weak. He is loaded. You are watching his eternal diary.
The smell hit first. Pine resin, thick and almost medicinal. The way it gets when a real tree has been standing in a heated room for too long. Underneath it, roasting garlic and rendered fat, and the faint sweetness of a glaze being brushed onto something in the oven. Candles somewhere. The waxy vanilla kind Vanessa ordered in bulk from a boutique in the West Village every November, without fail. The ones that cost $62 per pillar and burned down in about 4 days. Ethan Cole stood in the doorway of his own home and breathed all of it in, and he felt absolutely nothing. That was not always true. There was a version of this moment, a version that had already happened in a timeline he carried in his chest like a piece of shrapnel, where he had felt everything, where the smell of this house at Christmas had meant something clean and uncomplicated, where he would have loosened his tie on the threshold, set his briefcase by the console table, and followed the sound of Vanessa's laugh into the kitchen like a man walking toward warmth. That version of him had been grateful. That version of him had thought himself lucky. That version of him had died on a Tuesday in February, 3 years from now, when a driver named Hector Suarez ran a red light on the corner of 54th and Lexington. And the last thing Ethan Cole saw before the world went white was his own reflection in the windshield. A man in a good coat, a man who had no idea he had woken up in this body, in this life, 37 months ago. Not in a hospital, in his own bed, in this house, on a Wednesday morning in late September, with the sun coming through the curtains at the exact angle that meant 6:47, and his phone on the nightstand showing a date that made him lie very still for a long time. 3 years and 4 months before the accident. 2 years and 11 months before he would eventually find the photographs. 4 months before Vanessa would first meet a man named Marcus Hale at a client dinner at 11 Madison Park, and decide, with the quiet certainty of someone who has been waiting for permission, that she had married the wrong person. Ethan had understood all of it before any of it had even started. He had not screamed. He had not wept into the ceiling or gone to a therapist, or done any of the things a reasonable man might do after waking up inside a second life with the full memory of a first one. He had lain in the pale morning light for approximately 18 minutes, run the arithmetic of what he knew against what he could prove, and then he had gotten up, made coffee, and begun. 3 years and 4 months was enough time to do extraordinary things if you knew what you were building toward. He set his briefcase down by the console table now, out of habit, out of the same muscle memory that had carried him through 37 months of playing the role of himself. He heard her laugh from the kitchen, that particular frequency, the one pitched slightly higher than her real laugh, the one she used when she was performing, when she wanted someone to see her as effortless and warm. He had catalogued that laugh 18 months into his first life before he understood what it meant. In this life, he had recognized it on day 1. He walked toward it. The kitchen opened into the great room, and the great room held a table set for 11 people. And around that table, in various stages of arrival and arrangement, were the people who constituted Ethan's family. His mother, Diane, standing near the window with a glass of something red, wearing the ivory wrap dress she wore every Christmas without exception, the hem of which she had taken in twice in the last 3 years because she had lost weight she hadn't needed to lose. His brother Garrett, 2 years older, sitting on the arm of the sofa with a beer, laughing at something on his phone. Garrett's wife, Priya, in the kitchen proper, helping with something at the island, her dark hair pinned up and a smudge of what looked like flour on her left wrist. His Aunt Roberta, who was in fact his mother's college roommate, and not a blood relation, but had attended every Cole family Christmas since 1987, and had therefore earned the title permanently, seated in the low armchair by the fireplace with a crossword and a reading glass perched at the end of her nose. And Vanessa. She was standing at the island with a glass of wine, wearing a dress Ethan had not seen before, a deep forest green that she had clearly bought for this evening. And she was laughing with someone he had also not seen before, except that he had, because he had spent the better part of 3 years ensuring he knew everything about this particular someone. Marcus Hale was 41 years old. He was 6 feet even, which put him slightly shorter than Ethan, though he was built broader through the shoulders, the kind of build that photographs well and telegraphs a certain easy physical confidence. He had graduated from Dartmouth with a degree in economics, and from Wharton with an MBA he had leveraged into a position at Larson Capital, where he had risen to managing director over the course of 8 years through a combination of genuine ability and a talent for identifying whose proximity was most useful. He drove a black G-Wagon that was technically leased through a company he owned 40% of. He had been divorced once, briefly, from a woman named Claire, who had filed in Delaware and settled quickly, and whose settlement figure Ethan knew to the dollar. He had been sleeping with Ethan's wife for 14 months. Ethan knew the exact date they had first had sex because he had known, going into this second life, the approximate timeline. And he had hired a private investigator named Linda Cho, who worked out of an office in Midtown that smelled like stale coffee and printer toner. And Linda had been thorough in ways that had cost Ethan $40,000 over the course of 2 years, and he considered it 40,000 of the best dollars he had ever spent. He stood in the entrance of the great room and said, "Merry Christmas." His mother turned first, her face doing the thing it always did when she saw him. That immediate softening, the small, private happiness of a woman whose younger son she had spent years worrying about, and had recently allowed herself to stop. Ethan had been careful, in this second life, to give her less to worry about. He called more, he showed up to things. He had learned the first time around, too late, that his mother had carried a low hum of anxiety about him for most of his adult life, because he had been so relentlessly efficient, so contained that she could never quite tell if he was all right, and the not knowing was its own weight. "There he is," Diane said, and crossed to him, and he hugged her with his full attention for a moment, the way he had learned to do things in this second life, with full attention, because you only got the moment once even if you'd already lived it. Garrett called something from the sofa. Priya waved with the flowery wrist. Aunt Roberta did not look up from the crossword, but lifted 2 fingers in salute, which was her customary greeting, and required no response. And then Vanessa turned, and Marcus Hale turned with her, and Ethan watched his wife's face perform a sequence of emotions in approximately 3 seconds that he had become expert at reading. First, relief. He had been later than expected, and she had been wondering. Then, a particular kind of alert readiness, the face of someone who has rehearsed a thing and is now being asked to perform it. And then, so brief it would have been invisible to anyone who was not specifically watching for it. A flicker of something that was not guilt exactly, but was adjacent to it. The involuntary recognition that the person you have deceived has just entered the room. She smiled. It was a beautiful smile. She had always had a beautiful smile. "You made it," she said, and came toward him, and kissed him on the cheek, and he kissed her back, and he could smell her perfume and the wine on her breath, and he felt, precisely, nothing. "Traffic on the bridge," he said. "Who've we got?" The phrasing was deliberate, light, casual, the tone of a man noticing a new face, as if he had not spent 37 months preparing for this exact dinner. "Come here," she said, and took his arm, and walked him toward the island. "This is Marcus Hale. We've been working together on the Brennan account for about a year now, and I mentioned we were doing dinner and he just got back from London and his flight home isn't until the 27th, so..." She gestured. An airy, it-made-sense gesture. "I figured the more the merrier." Marcus Hale extended his hand, and he had a good handshake, firm and even, the handshake of a man who had been coached on handshakes at some point and taken the coaching seriously. "Marcus, sorry to crash the family party." "Not at all," Ethan said, and shook the hand, and looked at the man directly in the eyes, and smiled. "Ethan, I've heard a lot about you, actually." Something moved through Marcus Hale's eyes. Very quick, yet very controlled. The man had his own version of Ethan's containment, though it was built on a different architecture. His was the containment of someone who had learned to perform ease, rather than someone who came by it naturally. "All good, I hope," Marcus said. "Almost entirely," Ethan said pleasantly, and turned to accept a glass of wine from Priya. He spent the next 40 minutes being a good host. This was something he had also learned to do better in this second life, not to disappear into the functional logistics of a gathering, checking the food and managing the seating, but to actually be present in the room with the people in it. He sat beside his Aunt Roberta for 10 minutes and helped her with 2 clues in the crossword. He stood with Garrett at the window and talked about Garrett's daughter, Mia, Etor, who was 7 now and had apparently developed a passionate and inexplicable interest in competitive swimming, which Garrett found both impressive and logistically exhausting. He refreshed his mother's wine and asked her about the pottery class she had started in October, and she talked about it with her eyes lit up in the way that meant she had found something that mattered to her. And Ethan listened with the whole of himself. He watched Marcus Hale move through the room from his peripheral vision. Marcus was good at rooms. He knew how to calibrate his presence, conversational without dominating, charming without performing. The kind of man who made everyone feel briefly like the most interesting person in a gathering. Ethan noted the specific frequencies of his attention, how he clustered near Vanessa without hovering, how he deflected Diane's maternal questioning with a fluency that suggested he'd done it many times with many families, how he and Garrett found common ground in about 6 minutes over some sports opinion Ethan had no investment in. Marcus was doing what Marcus always did in rooms, which was to make himself belong. It was objectively impressive. Ethan could acknowledge the craft of a thing even when he was about to dismantle the thing. Dinner was served at 7:30. Roast lamb, facade, which Vanessa had sourced from a farm upstate and prepared with a crust of herbs and mustard, a recipe she had spent 2 Christmases perfecting and which was genuinely excellent. Roasted potatoes with rosemary, a bright bitter salad with pomegranate seeds and shaved fennel, rolls from a bakery in their neighborhood that had been Vanessa's most beloved discovery of 4 years ago, and which she bought in excess every time she went, as if the bakery might disappear before she returned. Ethan sat at the head of the table. Vanessa sat at the other end. This was their established geography, worked out in the first year of living in this house, a territorial negotiation so mild they had barely noticed it. Marcus Hale sat to Vanessa's right. Ethan's briefcase was still by the console table. The conversation moved through its dinner table registers. Garrett's daughter's swimming, Priya's mother, who had come from Mumbai in November and stayed longer than anticipated, Diane's pottery class, and the specific challenge of centering the clay, Aunt Roberta's annual complaint about the noise ordinance in her building, and the particular neighbor who violated it on a rotating schedule of instruments. Marcus contributed intelligently throughout. He asked questions. He laughed at the right moments. He had done his homework, either through Vanessa's narration of these people or through some social instinct that could reconstruct family dynamics from a few minutes' observation. Ethan let the conversation go where it wanted for most of dinner. He ate. He drank moderately. He was the person in the room he had spent 37 months constructing. Present, warm, the steady center of a table he had built. At 8:20, during the pause between the clearing of plates and the arrival of dessert, Garrett said, "Marcus, what is it you do exactly?" "Private equity," Marcus said. "Acquisitions focus. We look at underperforming mid-market companies, mostly in the logistics and distribution space, and we work on restructuring them." Like turning them around, Garrett said. Sometimes. Or identifying what's worth keeping and what isn't. Garrett said. New terms. With the tone of a man who found private equity vaguely suspect, but was too polite to pursue it at a dinner table. Ethan's in corporate law, Vanessa said, with a warmth that was entirely constructed, the warmth of someone bridging an awkward moment. So you two probably have some overlap. What kind of corporate work? Marcus asked. Ethan turned his glass slowly on the tablecloth. Mergers, primarily, some restructuring. A fair amount of work in the last few years on asset protection structures. He paused. It's interesting work. You spend a lot of time looking at the spaces between things. The spaces between what things? Diane asked. Between what people say they own, Ethan said, and what they actually own. Between the structure of an entity and the substance of it. Between a signature on a document and the legal validity of that signature. He smiled at his mother. Mostly what people discover is that the spaces are much larger than they thought. A brief silence. The particular silence of a table full of people who have all simultaneously registered that a register has shifted in a conversation without being able to identify how or why. Vanessa was looking at him. He met her eyes with a face that was entirely neutral. Marcus Hale had set down his wine glass. Dessert? Priya said, and stood, and the moment dispersed. Dessert was a Yule log that Vanessa had ordered from a French patisserie in the West 80s, dense chocolate and raspberry cream, and Aunt Roberta declared it the best thing she'd eaten since she couldn't remember, which was her highest form of praise. The conversation rebuilt itself around the dessert, and coffee arrived, and the evening moved into its late dinner softness. At 9:45, Ethan's mother stood to begin the process of leaving, which in Diane Cole's case involved a 10 to 15-minute spiral of gathering her things and saying goodbye to each person individually, and remembering one more thing to say after each goodbye had been delivered. Garrett and Priya had Mia at a neighbor's, and needed to retrieve her before 10. Aunt Roberta never stayed past 10 on principle, and had a car service arriving at 9:50. Ethan helped his mother into her coat in the hallway. She touched his face with both hands when she hugged him, the way she had always done, and he let her. You seem good, she said. I am good. You've seemed very good lately, she said, with a specific emphasis that meant she had noticed a change over the last several years and was not entirely sure what to attribute it to. Settled. Is that a compliment? From me, she said. It's the highest one. He kissed her on the cheek and watched her go down the front walk. Tao and Garrett and Priya followed, Priya hugging him with her flowery wrist that was no longer flowery, Garrett clapping him on the back and saying they'd do something in the new year, a real thing, not just talking about it. Aunt Roberta was already at the curb, reading the crossword on her phone while waiting for the car, and she raised 2 fingers without looking up as she climbed in. The house emptied. The front door closed. Ethan stood in the entrance hall for a moment, listening. From the kitchen, the sound of water running, glasses being moved, Vanessa doing the preliminary clearing that she always did before leaving the full washing for the morning. The particular domestic acoustics of a house after a dinner party, the transition from populated to quiet, the furniture resettling, and from the direction of the kitchen, another sound. 2 voices, low, not quite whispering but modulated to the lower register of a house that was supposed to be almost empty. He caught no words. He did not need to. He walked to the console table and picked up his briefcase. He carried it into the kitchen. Vanessa was at the sink, her back to him. Marcus was standing at the island, closer to the door, in the position of a man who had been moving toward the exit and stopped. They were not touching. They were standing in a configuration that would have read as entirely neutral to anyone who had not spent 37 months learning to read exactly this kind of configuration. "I've got the rest," Ethan said to Vanessa's back. "You don't need to stay." She turned. "I'm almost done." "I mean for the night," he said. "You should take Marcus home. Get him a car." A pause. The specific pause of two people recalibrating simultaneously. "I was just about to call a car," Marcus said. And his voice was entirely even, the voice of a man who had spent 14 months maintaining exactly this quality of evenness in exactly these kinds of moments. "Don't worry about it." "I'm not worried about it," Ethan said. "I just thought it might be more convenient." He set the briefcase on the island. He turned the latches. He opened it. He removed a folder, neatly tabbed, the kind used by law offices, with the firm's letterhead printed on a label on the front. He set it on the island between them. He said, "Vanessa, I had these prepared about 6 weeks ago. I've been waiting for what felt like the right moment." He looked at her. "I'd like you to look at them tonight, if you can." The kitchen was very quiet. The water had stopped. Somewhere in the distance, outside, a car went by. Vanessa's face had gone through 4 expressions in the space of 3 seconds and landed on one that was very still. She looked at the folder. She looked at Ethan. She did not touch the folder. "What is this?" she said. "Divorce papers," he said. "Comprehensive ones. I had 3 attorneys review them." The word comprehensive did a particular amount of work in that sentence, and he watched it land on Marcus Hale's face. Marcus said nothing. He was doing the calculation. Ethan could see it, the way you could always see the calculation moving across a face if you knew what cognitive labor looked like at rest, the quick inventory of exposure, of what was known and not known, of what this moment's consequences were for his own situation. "Ethan," Vanessa said, and her voice had the quality of someone standing on a surface that has just proven unreliable. "The financial disclosures are in the second tab," Ethan said. He spoke with the same tone he used in a conference room, informational, precise. "I'd recommend reading those first. They'll give you context for the rest." She reached for the folder. Her fingers were steady, which told him something. She had expected something. Not this exactly, not this shape or this timing, but some version of a reckoning. She opened to the second tab. He watched her read. The second tab contained a 23-page financial disclosure, and what it disclosed, in the specific and documented language of a corporate attorney who had spent 37 months preparing it, was the following: that the marital estate, which Vanessa had calculated at some point to be worth approximately $8 to $9 million, was worth considerably less than that. That the primary asset in that estate, which was the house they were standing in, was held in a trust structure that had been established by Ethan's father in 1994 and modified by a specific amendment filed in 2019, which Ethan had arranged. And that under the terms of that amendment, the property passed to Ethan's descendants or reverted to a charitable foundation. And that Vanessa had signed a document in 2021 acknowledging the terms of this trust. A document she had signed during a closing procedure she had not read carefully because closings were long and Ethan had handled the legal work. That the primary investment account, which Vanessa believed to contain roughly $2 million and which was listed under both names, had in fact been a joint account of a type that, under New York domestic relations law, allowed for a specific form of unilateral restructuring in the event of marital breakdown, and that this restructuring had been completed 9 months ago. That the business entity through which Ethan conducted his legal practice, Cole Strategic Counsel LLC, had been a single-member LLC since its founding, meaning its assets were entirely outside the marital estate by structure, and that a 2022 operating agreement amendment had further clarified this exclusion. That the investment portfolio held in Ethan's name at a brokerage account he had established in the first year of this second life had been funded through performance bonuses paid to him personally, and that under the terms of a post-nuptial agreement, one of 3 documents Vanessa had signed during what she had believed to be a routine estate planning update in the spring of 2023, So, the documents having been described to her by the family's estate attorney as standard asset protection measures, these funds were separately classified. Ethan had spent 37 months on the architecture of this. He had not done any of it through fraud. He had done all of it through the meticulous and entirely legal use of structures that already existed, applied with the patience and precision of a man who knew exactly what he was protecting himself from, and exactly how much time he had. The estate attorney who had processed the post-nuptial documents was a real estate attorney named Howard Finch, who specialized in high-net-worth asset protection and who had been Ethan's client for 6 years, and who had, when Ethan explained what he needed and why, looked at him for a long time and then said, "You understand this is legal, but not precisely what I'd call sporting." And Ethan had said, "I understand that." And Howard had done it because it was legal, and because he was a professional, and because he had seen enough family law proceedings to understand that a man protecting himself from a predictable outcome was not the same as a man acting in bad faith. Vanessa turned pages. Her face had the quality of someone reading in a language they understand, but had not expected to encounter here, the effort visible in the small muscles around her eyes. She reached the 7th page and stopped. She said, "The post-nuptial." "Yes," Ethan said. "I signed this during the estate planning review." "You did?" Howard said it was a standard asset protection update. "It is a standard asset protection structure," Ethan said. "It's a very clean document. Howard's good." Silence. "Ethan?" Her voice had changed. Not anger, not yet. That would come later, probably, or maybe it wouldn't. Because there were some situations where anger was a response to surprise, and she was standing in a kitchen with a document that was showing her she had been several steps behind a man she had believed was not paying close enough attention. What her voice held now was something more like the specific chill of comprehension. "How long have you known?" He looked at her. He thought about the moment in a hospital in February 3 years from now, the moment that had not happened in this life and would not happen, the moment when Linda Cho had come to him with a photograph and a voice recorder, and he had sat in a chair by a window that looked out onto a parking structure and understood, in the original version of his life, for the first time, what he had been looking at for years without seeing it. He thought about the specific texture of that comprehension, not the drama of betrayal. Because he had not felt dramatic about it even the first time, he had felt the way a building must feel when its load-bearing structure gives, a deep structural rearrangement, everything above still temporarily in place, the collapse a process rather than an instant. "Long enough," he said. Marcus Hale had not moved from his position by the kitchen door. He was standing with his hands very still at his sides, which Ethan recognized as the posture of a man who was deciding whether this situation required him to speak or whether speaking would make it worse. Ethan looked at him. "There's a section for you as well," Ethan said. "Tab 4. "I don't think," Marcus started. "You're listed as a named third party," Ethan said. "That has some implications. Tab 4 explains them." Marcus Hale did not reach for the folder. Ethan did not press it. He had not included Tab 4 because it contained material devastation. It did not, exactly, because the leverage available against Marcus in a divorce proceeding was limited by what was actionable. He had included Tab 4 because it contained something more precisely targeted. A summary of the fiduciary implications of Marcus Hale's position at Larson Capital, where he was a managing director subject to a code of conduct that included disclosure obligations regarding relationships with counterparty personnel, and where the specific nature of his relationship with a professional contact at a firm with which Larson had 3 active engagements raised compliance questions that Marcus would have to address whether Ethan raised them formally or not. Tab 4 was not a weapon designed to fire immediately. It was designed to sit in Marcus Hale's awareness like a sliver of glass. "I'm going to give you some space," Ethan said to Vanessa. "The documents have a 30-day response window, but I'd appreciate something in writing within 10 days indicating you've reviewed them and have or are securing counsel." He closed the briefcase. "The house is yours to use until the proceedings are finalized. I'll be at the Mercer." He had already booked it. 3 nights with the option to extend. He had a bag in the car. "You have a bag in the car," Vanessa said. "Yes." She looked at him for a moment, and in her face, underneath the stillness and the processing, and the particular cold clarity that was beginning to replace the initial shock, he saw something that was almost, not quite, but almost, the expression of someone who had underestimated something and was acknowledging it. Not regret. Not exactly. More like recognition. "The post-nuptial," she said again. "You had 3 days to review it before signing," he said. "That's documented. Howard's paralegal sent 2 email reminders." She had not reviewed it. He had known she would not review it. Not because she was careless, but because they had been in a period, 2 years ago, when things between them had been performing normalcy with sufficient conviction that she had not thought to be suspicious of a document her own husband's estate attorney was handling. He had banked on exactly that. He picked up the briefcase. "There's coffee left," he said, nodding toward the carafe. "Use whatever you need." He walked through the great room and into the entrance hall. He put on his coat. He took his keys from the hook by the door where they always hung. The hook that had a small ceramic bird on it that Priya had given them 3 Christmases ago, and which Vanessa had hung there because she liked it, and which Ethan had always thought was a small, perfect thing. He stood at the front door for a moment. Behind him, from the kitchen, nothing. The silence of 2 people in a room who are not speaking to each other. He opened the door and walked out into the December cold. He was on the bridge when the first text came. He had known the timing would be approximately this. She needed 20 minutes to read the full disclosure, another 10 to begin understanding its implications. And then the calls would start. The calls from her attorney, who was a woman named Diane Park she had been consulting with for 8 months. Ethan knew this because Linda Cho had been thorough, but who had been working with incomplete financial information because Vanessa's understanding of the marital estate had been incomplete. The texts before the calls. He let the text sit unread and drove. The Mercer was on Prince Street, and he had stayed there twice before in his previous life. Once during a renovation of the house's master bath, and once during a period of severe marital tension that he had, the first time around, navigated by retreating and returning, by the old familiar logic of absorbed friction. The room they had given him was on the 4th floor, and it looked out onto the street, and the light was the particular amber of a hotel room at night. The light designed to be quiet. He set the briefcase on the desk and sat in the chair by the window and looked at the street for a while. He did not feel relief. This was something he had wondered about in the months of preparation, whether the execution of the plan would produce some release. It did not. What it produced was the same thing the whole of the last 37 months had produced, which was a kind of steady, practiced purposefulness, the sensation of a long project in progress. The dinner was a step, not an ending. There were things still to complete. He had a meeting at 10 in the morning with Howard Finch, who would begin filing the necessary documents. He had a meeting at 2 with a forensic accountant named Reyes, who had spent 3 months building a complete picture of the marital financial landscape, including assets that Marcus Hale had helped to obscure, because there were 3 separate instances in the last 14 months in which transactions in Vanessa's professional compensation — she was a senior partner at a brand consultancy that billed $8 to $12 million annually — had been structured in ways that Reyes had identified as consistent with the movement of funds intended to reduce the disclosed marital estate. These were not large transactions, not individually. 40,000 here, 65,000 there. a corporate card benefit redirected through an account held by a limited liability company in which Marcus Hale was a registered agent, small enough to have been invisible to anyone who was not specifically looking, not small enough to be legally insignificant. That piece of the puzzle was the piece he had protected most carefully, because it was the piece that elevated the proceedings from a straightforward asset division matter into something with potential civil implications. He had not decided yet whether to deploy it directly or hold it as leverage. A great deal depended on how Vanessa's counsel responded in the first 30 days and what posture they chose to take. He suspected they would not take an aggressive posture once they had seen the disclosure. He had designed the disclosure to produce exactly that. He ordered food from the room service menu at 11. A simple thing, soup and bread. They decided the cold weather practicality of it. And while he waited for it, he opened his laptop and read through the filing summary Howard had prepared. It was clean. Howard was one of the 4 best estate attorneys in New York, and he worked with the deliberate care of a man who had learned that the fastest path through complicated legal terrain was absolute precision. No shortcuts, no assumptions, no language that could later be argued about. The food arrived. He ate by the window. A cab had broken down half a block up the street, and a small argument was developing between the driver and a man in a delivery vest, conducted in 2 languages, occasionally achieving a brief accord before disagreeing again. Ethan watched it with the peripheral attention of a man whose primary focus was elsewhere. His phone showed 12 missed calls from Vanessa's number and 1 text sent at 11:41 that said, "I need to understand what you've done." He turned it face down on the windowsill. He did not read it. He had already understood everything she would want to understand, had understood it longer than she had, and there was nothing in the space of her comprehension now that he was obligated to guide her through. That was what her attorney was for. He met with Howard at 10. Howard Finch's office was in a building on Park Avenue that had been built in 1928 and still retained the elevator lobby of its original design. The terrazzo floors and the brass fixtures, the specific quality of a space that had been made to last and had. Howard himself was 64 and had the white hair and unhurried manner of a man who had been doing difficult things for a long time and had made his peace with the pace of difficult things. "She's already called me," Howard said, settling into his chair with his coffee. "Diane Park?" "She called at 8 this morning. I told her I could speak on Thursday." "And?" "She was not delighted by that." Howard turned his pen in his hand. "She knows the documents are sound. She's going to ask for time to review the post-nuptial agreement." "She can have time." "She may try to argue it should be set aside. Procedural coercion, something along those lines." "She can try," Ethan said. "The review period is documented. The reminders are documented. There's no coercion argument that doesn't require her to claim Vanessa is incapable of reviewing a 15-page document over 3 days." "Which she won't claim," Howard agreed. "What's your read on the trust?" "Solid," Howard said. "The 2019 amendment is unambiguous. The charitable reversion clause is the piece she'll push on because it creates an argument that you set this up to leave her with nothing. But that argument runs headlong into the fact that the amendment predates any documented marital difficulty by 3 years." He paused. "Which it does because you asked me to file it 3 years ago." "Yes." "I'm still thinking about that," Howard said, not for the first time. He had said it in various formulations over the last 3 years. "I'm still thinking about how you knew to do this when you did this." He had never pressed for an explanation. Or unknown, Howard was a man who had processed enough extraordinary situations that he had developed a professional discipline against pursuing explanations for things that were not legally relevant. "The filing timeline is clean," Ethan said. "The filing timeline is a thing of beauty," Howard said. "I don't want to know more than I know." They moved through the procedural schedule. The initial filing would be submitted today. The 30-day response window was standard. The forensic accounting report from Reyes would be introduced if and when Ethan decided to raise the fund movement issue, which Howard recommended holding in reserve until they saw Park's first response. "What about Hale?" Howard said. "What about him? Does he become a formal party?" "Not unless I need him to," Ethan said. "He's more useful as a shadow." Howard looked at him for a moment. "You've been very prepared for this." "I'm a careful person." "I've worked with careful people for 40 years, Howard said. "You are something else." He said it without judgment, the way a craftsman might note the quality of a piece of work without interrogating the process that produced it. The meeting with Reyes was at 2, and it was in a different part of the city, downtown, in a building that had been a warehouse and had been converted into offices that retained the warehouse's structural bones: high ceilings, exposed ductwork, windows that were very large and very clean. Reyes had come to this work through securities enforcement and had spent a decade at the SEC before moving into private forensic accounting. And she had the specific manner of a person who spent her professional life looking for things that were hidden and had come to regard concealment as a kind of interesting puzzle. She had found 3 things. The first was the $40,000 Ethan already knew about: a consulting fee paid to an LLC called Millhaven Strategies in January of the previous year, Millhaven being a company registered in Delaware whose registered agent was Marcus Hale and whose single documented transaction was this fee. The second was a recurring arrangement under which Vanessa's professional expense account had been used for 4 transactions that Reyes had traced to properties in the Chelsea neighborhood of Manhattan, specifically to a sublet arrangement on an apartment in a building on West 23rd Street. Seitan, the apartment being the one in which Marcus Hale had been living since his divorce from Claire. The third was the most interesting one. "Tell me about the third again," Ethan said. Reyes turned her laptop to face him. "Her consultancy has a revenue-sharing arrangement with 3 partner firms. The arrangement is disclosed in the partnership documents, and it's entirely standard. But one of the 3 partner firms was added 18 months ago, and that firm, Calder Brand Consulting, registered in Wyoming, has a 90% revenue pass-through rate, meaning almost all of the income it receives from the partnership arrangement passes immediately to another entity." She tapped the screen. "That entity is a family trust." "Whose family?" "The trust is named the Hal Moore Family Trust." "Hal," Ethan said. "Hale," Reyes said. "Yes, it's not precisely a coincidence." Ethan looked at the screen. "Can you trace the beneficial ownership?" "I've begun to," Reyes said. "The Wyoming filing is minimal. Wyoming doesn't require disclosure of beneficial ownership in trust instruments, but the trust has a registered trustee, a law firm in Casper, and I've found a corresponding trust instrument filed in a different state in a related proceeding that I believe is the same trust, and that document does list a beneficiary." She turned to another screen. The name was Marcus David Hale. Ethan sat with this for a moment. This was beyond what he had known coming into this second life. This was new information, the kind of information that a financial forensic investigator found when she was specifically looking for it, and was very good at her job. He had known, in general terms, that there was a financial dimension to Vanessa and Marcus's relationship that went beyond the personal. He had known about the Millhaven transaction. He had not known about the revenue-sharing arrangement or the Hal Moore Family Trust. "What's the total flow through that trust in the period you've reviewed?" he said. Reyes looked at her notes. 18 months, approximately $340,000. From revenue generated through my wife's firm. Routed through a partner firm that Marcus Hale effectively controls, yes, she folded her hands. I want to be precise about the effectively. The beneficial ownership argument is not airtight yet. I could make it more airtight with another 3 to 4 weeks of work. Do that, Ethan said. This also potentially involves the partnership, Reyes said. The other partners of her firm may not be aware that one of their revenue-sharing arrangements is structured this way." "They're not," Ethan said. She looked at him. "I know 2 of the 3 senior partners well," he said. "They're not aware." A pause. Reyes had the composure of someone who had heard many things in many offices and had learned not to register them visibly. "If the partnership becomes aware," she said carefully, "the nature of this proceeding changes substantially." "I know," Ethan said. What she was calibrating was this. If Vanessa's partners learned that she had introduced a revenue-sharing arrangement that was effectively funneling firm income to her lover's family trust without their knowledge or consent, the consequences for Vanessa would not be limited to the divorce proceeding. They would extend into her professional life in ways that would be permanent and not fully within Ethan's control to manage. He had known this was possible. He had not known, until 40 minutes ago, how precisely true it was. "What's your timeline for the beneficial ownership documentation?" he said. 3 weeks, Reyes said. "Maybe 2.5. 2.5, he said. "And I need the supporting documents formatted for potential use in a civil proceeding." "Civil as in," Reyes began. "As in the partnership's potential action against her," Ethan said. "I'm not going to initiate that, but I want the materials prepared in case the partnership asks me for a referral." Reyes held his gaze for a moment. "That's a fine distinction," she said. "Yes," he said, "it is. There are things that happen inside a man when he has known for a long time what is coming, and then it arrives." He had thought about this in the 37 months of preparation. In the late nights and the early mornings and the spaces between the two, where he would lie in the dark, in the house on the Upper West Side, and listen to Vanessa breathe beside him with the patient breathing of a deeply sleeping person who did not know she was being disassembled from a distance. He had not hated her. This was something he had interrogated carefully, in the first year especially, when the knowledge was still fresh and the years ahead still long. Hatred would have been simple, but it would also have been a kind of fuel that corrupted the engine. He had known men who had driven through the destruction of something they loved on the fuel of pure anger. And the characteristic of those men, uniformly, was that they were imprecise. Anger was not precise. It was reactive, and it left marks in the wrong places. What he felt about Vanessa was the specific, clear, non-transferable understanding of what she was and what she had decided, and what that meant. She was a person who had made a series of choices, and the choices had been her own, and the consequences of those choices were going to fall on her with the weight of 37 months of careful architecture. And that was not cruelty. It was physics. He had asked himself, somewhere in the second year, whether there was a version of this second life in which he did none of it, in which he simply lived differently, built things differently, protected himself quietly, and moved forward without the architecture of the ending he had designed, in which he let the affair happen, gathered some evidence, and filed a standard divorce with the ordinary outcomes of an ordinary dissolution. He had thought about it for about 3 days. He had considered it seriously, as a real option. The conclusion he had come to was not driven by anger or by the desire for punishment. It was driven by something more structural. He had been given something rare, the precise foreknowledge of a betrayal, and with that foreknowledge came a specific kind of responsibility. Not to punish her, not to make her suffer, but to ensure that the mechanisms by which she and Marcus had operated, the small financial deceptions, the firm income diverted to a trust, the apparatus of a relationship that had been conducted in the margins of lives and institutions they were both trusted by, were documented and addressed, not by him, ultimately, but by the systems that existed to address them. His job was to ensure those systems had the information they needed. He had told himself this many times, and he believed it, and he knew also that it was not entirely complete as an explanation. There was something in him that was simply irreducibly good at this kind of thing, at the construction of consequences, and that something had wanted to do the work at full complexity. He was honest enough with himself to hold both truths. On the 28th of December, Diane Park filed a response to the divorce filing that was, in Ethan's assessment, the response of an excellent attorney working with incomplete information. It challenged the procedural validity of the post-nuptial agreement on the basis of what Park called insufficient independent legal counsel disclosure, meaning she was arguing that Vanessa had not been sufficiently informed of her right to have her own attorney review the document before signing. It requested full financial discovery from Cole Strategic Counsel, LLC, on the basis that the LLC structure might have been used to improperly sequester marital assets. And it included a request for forensic accounting of all accounts held in Ethan's name for the preceding 5 years. Howard called him from a taxi, because Howard always called from taxis. "She's going for the LLC," Howard said. "I know." The discovery request is broad. "It's a fishing expedition," Ethan said. "There's nothing to find because there's nothing to hide. Open it up." A pause. "You're sure?" "Howard, I've run a legitimate practice for 9 years. Every billing record is accurate. Every client engagement is documented. Every dollar that went into or out of that LLC is traceable to a legitimate business purpose." A further pause. "I would like them to conduct a very thorough discovery of Cole Strategic Counsel, LLC." Howard said after a moment. "You genuinely are something else." "Set the discovery date for early February," Ethan said. "Give them whatever they want." The independent counsel argument on the post-nuptial was the most defensible piece of Park's filing, and Ethan spent an afternoon with the relevant documents going back through the email chain between Howard's paralegal, Howard, Ethan, and the review process. There were 2 weeks of email correspondence. There were 2 explicit notifications that Vanessa was encouraged to seek independent review. There was a 3-day gap between the delivery of the document and the signing, during which Vanessa had sent no communication indicating she had any questions, had not contacted Howard's office, and had attended 2 professional client dinners, one of which she had attended with Marcus Hale, according to a calendar entry that Ethan had screenshotted 11 months ago. She had simply not read it. Park would know this. What Park would be calculating was whether a judge would find that didn't read it was meaningfully different from wasn't given adequate opportunity to have it reviewed. In New York, with a clean procedural record, that was a difficult argument to win. It was not an impossible argument, but it was an uphill one, and Ethan had spent 37 months making sure the hill was steep. The conversation with Vanessa happened on the 30th because she requested it, and because there was no good strategic reason to refuse it. They met at a coffee shop in their neighborhood, a place they had gone to so many times that the staff recognized both of them, and the specific quality of sitting across from each other in a booth that had their order already being prepared before they'd even spoken felt to Ethan like a particular kind of precision cruelty that the universe had arranged without his help. She looked composed. She had always been good at composed. She was wearing a coat he recognized, a camel wool one she'd had for 4 years, and no jewelry except her watch, and there was something studied about the absence of the ring. The deliberateness of the statement. "I want to understand the timeline," she said. "Ask me anything." "The post-nuptial? When did you decide to do that?" "Spring of 2023, he said. "You know that. The signing is dated." "But when did you decide?" He looked at her. "Are you asking when I knew?" "Yes." He thought about what version of the truth was appropriate here. Not the impossible version. Not the version involving a Tuesday in February and a car accident, and a Tuesday in September waking up 37 months prior. a version that was close to functionally true. "A long time ago," he said, "I noticed things. I'm good at noticing things, and I made the logical preparations." She was quiet for a moment. "The trust amendment," she said. "Your father's trust. My father set it up. I had it amended. Oh, the structure is what it is." "You had it amended 2 months after we moved in." "Yes." "We had been married for 3 years." "Yes." She looked at her coffee. "You didn't trust me even then." Ethan was careful here. "I made decisions about asset protection. The trust amendment is a standard estate planning tool. It's not—" He paused. "It's not an emotional document." She looked up at him. "Everything is an emotional document, Ethan. You know that." He did know that. He did not say so. "The firm," she said. "The revenue-sharing arrangement." There it was. He watched her face. She was watching his. "Your attorney raised that," he said, which was not true because Park had not raised it, because Park did not know about it yet. "Diane hasn't mentioned it," Vanessa said. "I'm mentioning it." Ethan said nothing. "I know you found the Calder arrangement," she said. "I know because I know what you're capable of." She set down her coffee cup with a controlled precision that was the only sign of anything less than stillness in her entire body. "I need you to tell me what you're planning to do with it." He looked at her for a moment. "The Halmore Family Trust," he said. She closed her eyes for a second. Just a second. "You know the name," she said. "Reyes is thorough." A long pause. Outside, someone walked a dog that was wearing a small red coat, and the dog stopped on the sidewalk and turned to look at something only it could see, and its owner waited with the practiced patience of a person who had been through this routine many times. "That arrangement," Vanessa said, and her voice had changed register, had come down off the composed level to something more honest, was Marcus's idea. The structure of it. I understood it as a revenue-sharing arrangement with an affiliated firm. I didn't fully understand—" She stopped. "You didn't fully understand that the affiliated firm was effectively his," Ethan said. "Not initially. When did you understand it?" She looked at the table. "About 9 months ago." "And you left it in place?" "Ethan." She said his name with a weight that was not an accusation exactly, but was something in the vicinity of the acknowledgement of a situation whose full complexity she had been not quite willing to look at directly. "I was in a situation." "I know what situation you were in," he said. "Do you?" She looked up. "Do you actually know what it's like to be in a thing like that? Where every decision you make compounds the previous one. Where extracting yourself—" She stopped again. "The arrangement is about $300,000. Total. I know that. I know it looks exactly like what it is. But it started as something—" She paused. "It started smaller than it looks now?" He looked at her. He thought about the woman in the hospital, which had been a different version of this woman, the version that had existed in the timeline that was now not going to happen. He thought about what it had felt like, in that version, to understand for the first time what 3 years of a life had actually contained, the specific nausea of it, the way it restructured every memory. He had made choices in this second life that were not simple. The postnuptial, the trust amendment, the 37 months of construction. He had made them deliberately and with full knowledge of what he was doing. He was not the innocent party in a simple narrative. He was a man who had foreknowledge and had used it. The ethics of that were his own to carry. "The partnership arrangement," he said. "If Reyes's report goes to Park, and through Park into Discovery, the partnership will see it." "I know." "That's not a decision I've made yet," he said. "Think about whether to take it to that level." She looked at him carefully. "Are you telling me," she said, "that there's something I can do about that?" "I'm telling you," he said, "that there are decisions I haven't made yet." He picked up his coffee. The 30-day response window closes on the 5th. If Park's response to the asset division is reasonable, and I mean functionally reasonable, not strategic, there may not be a reason to introduce everything I have. She was quiet. "Marcus," she said. "Is not my problem," Ethan said. "What he and the Hallmore family trust and the Calder arrangement represent for the firm is a problem that belongs to the firm, not to me. Whether that comes out in this proceeding or in some other way is not something I can fully control." She looked at the window for a moment, at the sidewalk, at a city going about its December, almost January business with the focused efficiency of people who had things to do. "He told me," she said. And her voice had gone very quiet. "In October, that I had complicated this. I remember the exact word, complicated, like I was a factor in a situation rather than a person." A pause. "I don't know why I'm telling you this." "You're telling me because you're trying to figure out whether I'm angry." She looked at him. "Are you?" "No," he said. And it was true, and she could tell it was true, and the quality of the silence that followed was different from any silence that had preceded it in the conversation. "That's worse," she said softly. He left $3 on the table for the coffee he had drunk, and stood and put on his coat. He stood by the booth for a moment, looking at her. "Diane Park has until the 5th, he said. "A good faith response to the asset division. That's what I need." He walked to the door. He did not look back. Not because it was a dramatically correct choice, but because there was genuinely nothing in the direction of back that he needed. The 5th came. Park's response to the asset division was, by any professional measure, good faith. She conceded the trust structure after reviewing the 2019 amendment and the 2021 acknowledgement signature. She conceded the LLC exclusion after the discovery process produced exactly what Ethan had said it would produce, which was 9 years of clean business records. She pushed on the investment portfolio, arguing that some portion of it derived from marital earnings rather than entirely from performance bonuses, and Ethan instructed Howard to agree to a 50-50 split on a portion of it, the portion that Ethan had always known was arguable, because conceding an arguable point early was not weakness, it was the removal of oxygen from a fire. The post-nuptial agreement held. Park's independent counsel argument was filed as a formal motion and was reviewed by a family court judge named Calloway, who had been on the bench for 11 years and who had heard approximately this argument 40 or 50 times in various forms. The ruling came back in the 3rd week of January. The motion was denied. The forensic accounting of the Calder arrangement was kept out of the formal proceedings. Ethan had made the decision to hold it, not as a gesture of mercy, but as a clean strategic choice. Introducing it would have complicated and lengthened the proceedings, drawn in the partnership as a third party, and produced a level of collateral destruction that served no interest he had identified as his own. He had the information. Howard had the information. Reyes had documented it in a report that sat in a file in Howard's office and would remain there. Whether Vanessa told the partnership about it, or whether Marcus Hale's compliance issues at Larson Capital became visible through some other mechanism, was not Ethan's to determine. He had built the architecture. He had placed the weight on the structure. What the structure did under that weight over time was its own business. The final divorce decree came through on the 14th of February. Ethan was in his office at Cole Strategic Counsel when Howard called. Howard was in a car, as usual. It was 3:20 in the afternoon, and the light through the west-facing window was low and pale, the specific wan light of a winter that was beginning just barely to decide to end. "It's done," Howard said. "Good," Ethan said. "How are you feeling?" Ethan looked at the window. A pigeon had landed on the ledge outside and was regarding the glass with the focused blankness of a creature that did not do introspection but was very committed to the present moment. Like a man with a very clean balance sheet, he said. Howard made a sound that was not quite a laugh. I'll send the final documents this afternoon. Thank you, Howard. Thank you for the business, Howard said, which was how he always ended calls, as if all of this were simply commerce, and in some technical sense it was, and Ethan respected the precision of that framing. He set the phone down on the desk. He looked at the pigeon, which had decided the window held no further interest, and lifted off, dropping for a moment below the sill before the air caught it, and it was simply gone. He did not stay at the Mercer forever. 3 weeks after the decree, he found an apartment on the Lower West Side, a floor in a building that had been converted from a factory, all raw concrete and very large windows, the kind of space that had been built to contain industrial processes and had ended up containing someone's curated idea of austere luxury. He liked it for the light. He liked that it contained nothing that had been chosen by anyone except himself. He had almost nothing to put in it. The house on the Upper West Side was in the process of being transferred back into the trust structure, Vanessa having accepted the reversion clause as part of the settlement. She would move out in April. She would keep a percentage of the investment portfolio, the cars, her own professional income, and the understanding that the Calder arrangement and the Halmore family trust were documented in a file that could, in some hypothetical circumstance, become relevant. She did not need this explained to her. He carried his boxes up the stairs of the Lower West Side apartment himself. 3 boxes. One of books, one of kitchen things, one of miscellaneous objects that he had identified as genuinely his, a mug from a hotel in Tokyo that he had not been able to leave behind, a photograph of himself and Garrett at a fishing camp when Ethan was 11 and Garrett 13, and both of them deeply uncertain about fishing. A small wooden object his father had kept on his desk, which was technically a Japanese netsuke, a toggle carved from boxwood into the shape of a sleeping fox, which Ethan had always loved without knowing precisely why. He set these things in the apartment and stood in the middle of the floor for a while. The light was very good. His phone showed a text from Garrett. Heard it went through. You okay? He texted back. Yes. Garrett. Dinner? Ethan. Not tonight. Garrett. Later this week. Mia wants to show you something she learned in the pool. He set the phone down on the windowsill and sat on the floor, because he had no furniture yet, and looked out at the city. He was 39 years old. He had made it through, and he had arrived here, in this version of his life, in a place that was an empty room and a good light, and a sleeping fox made of wood. And there was no feeling of completion because completion was not what this was. It was simply the next thing, the new floor of the building. The moment after the foundation was finished when the actual structure could begin. He thought about Linda Cho, who had worked diligently for 2 years and sent thorough reports and had asked him once, in the parking lot outside her office building after a handoff, whether he was going to be okay, and he had said yes, and she had looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who suspected that the question and the answer were operating on different frequencies. He thought about Reyes, whose final report was in a file in Howard's office, and about the $340,000 in the Halmore Family Trust, and about the specific patience required to build a consequence that lands precisely rather than explosively. He thought about Marcus Hale. There had been, in the 3rd week of January, a compliance review initiated at Larson Capital, not by Ethan, not through any mechanism he had touched, but through the ordinary channels of corporate governance, which ran on their own schedule and turned up their own things. He knew this because Linda Cho still had her contacts, and sometimes sent him information she thought he would find informative. Marcus Hale had been placed on administrative leave while the review was conducted. The nature of the review had not been publicly disclosed. Ethan had filed that information and done nothing with it. He picked up the sleeping fox and turned it in his hands. The carving was very precise. You could see the grain of the wood through the lacquer, and the fox's face was tucked into its own tail, and if you looked at it from a certain angle, the expression was ambiguous between sleep and the early stages of attention, the animal not quite still, suspended at the exact boundary between rest and readiness. His father had kept it on his desk for 30 years. His phone showed one text he had not yet looked at, received this morning from a number he did not have saved but that he recognized from a year of occasional contact. Marcus Hale. The text said, "I know what you have. What do you want?" Ethan read it once. He set the phone face down on the floor. He did not answer.